What's up, grinders? So today I'm going to have a little bit of a hot take. So grab the popcorn, get ready for the comment section because I'm going to unleash the beast. So what am I talking about? Well, I believe for the most part that learning a language for the time it takes is economically a stupid decision. Yes, I know that seems strange coming from a guy who loves talking about languages every day. But let me roll this back a little bit and let you know where this is coming from. So I was on Reddit, I know, cesspool, but I was on Reddit, I was having a look around, got hooked into the language subreddit, and I saw someone mention something that I've experienced before. I know pretty much every Esperanto speaker's experienced before, and if you've learned a language, you've definitely experienced at some point, except for if it's English, but it also applies to English. So here's what I heard. Someone said, why are you learning language X when you should be learning language Y? You can make money with language Y. You know, that's like such a better decision. I'm sure you've all heard this. If you haven't, you're within the 1%. Okay, so why is learning a language economically, therefore, a stupid decision when that's the go-to argument that you'll always hear from your teachers, your parents, and everyone who's monolingual that exists? Here's why it's a stupid decision. How long does it take to learn a language? I'm not talking about those polyglots who speak 20 plus languages. How long? Well, you could say roughly 6,000 hours, 2,000, 6,000, whatever. It's an insane amount of time. If you spent 2,000 to 6,000 hours on any other skill, you would probably be considered a senior within that field. And you could probably be making a lot of money doing that job. I know, I have spent half the time on programming as I have on one of my languages, and I've made obscenely more amounts of money via programming than I have with my language skills. This is probably going to be applicable for almost every trade out there. Hell, even a garbage man most of the time is going to make more money than someone who specializes in ancient Latin, okay? Or any language for that matter. Now, you're probably thinking, whoa, hold your horses. What about, you could become an interpreter, or you could become a translator. An interpreter or a translator? Okay, interpreter, for one, they usually get people who are native within the language, and then they know a second language, or they're native in both languages to do that role. So unless you're going to become the cream of the crop in that language, which means you're definitely doing that 6,000 hours or more, you're not going to get that job. There is one case where you can make money doing it, but it's also not obscene amounts of money. And that is if you're going to become a sign language interpreter, because in that case, pretty much every interpreter has to learn the language. Although I have kind of met people who grew up in families that they can actually hear, but so they learned sign language because of the parents or whatever. But like, there's very few cases where that is applicable. And if you look at the general salary of an interpreter or a language teacher overall, it's shite. It's not good. Okay, but what about other cases? Well, there are some cases. If you're going to become an astronaut, you might learn Russian so you can communicate with the cosmonauts on the International Space Station, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to be your main source of income. So let's scrap that one, okay? What else is there? Well, if you learn Latin, I guess, you could become a Vatican certified lawyer who deals with the old texts. But unless you're religious and you're also a lawyer, it's not really that useful. Well, you could work at a hotel, I guess, and you can communicate with the clients coming in. But if you're working at a hotel, you're probably not too caring about how much money you're making anyway, and you're probably more learning languages because it's fun as opposed to anything else. Now, have you noticed something about this conversation so far? Pretty much in every single instance, language learning has been an auxiliary skill that's given value to your main skill. But it's an auxiliary skill that takes an obscene amount of time to master, and therefore, is it really economically that valuable? Now, you might be thinking, well, that's because you're thinking about these little languages. What about someone learning English? That's the one that everyone goes to, okay? You should learn English over this. Even you Australians who don't actually speak English. Yeah, I've heard that before as well. But I hope they were joking in that case. Here's an example. My wife speaks English. She's from China. So it's been of value to her. She lives in Australia. But she lives in Australia, okay? So unless you're planning to live within that country for a long period of time, it's probably not going to be of value because she speaks English almost native level. There's a slight accent, okay? But she has spent probably 15 years working on this language every day. And she has basically gone to jobs where she didn't get recruited just due to the fact that she has a slight accent as opposed to the native, because, well, you need to interact with customers and we want to make sure there's no communication barrier issues right there. Notice that? So in fact, for English, it hasn't even been that beneficial except for the part where she lives in Australia. All the other people who learn English in her class in China, well, we recently went back to China. Well, in fact, we're right here now, but I mean like in the past prior to this. We went back and we took part in like a university school reunion of her friends, and most of them were from her English class. And the funny thing is, most of them don't speak English anymore. They got some basic, like, ability within the language, you know, residual from when they were learning back in the old days, and they can, like, say some basic sentences and stuff, but for the most part, my Chinese is way higher than their English level. And the funny thing is, these guys learnt the language for economic reasons, and they have no use for it in their everyday life. The vast majority of Chinese people don't have a use for English unless they really are interested in what's happening outside their country. And this is for the cream of the crop of languages. For English, if you start going down to any other language, the job opportunities is actually very small. And now to add on top of all of that, this was probably a much better situation 5 years ago. Now we're in the situation where technology is taking over translation and editing and all this type of stuff. A great example is recently I was communicating with the receptionist at the company that's doing the building for our house. For the last year or so while communicating with her, she's written in English. Her English is very like bad, but it's not non-native bad. It's bad as in it's an English speaker who just can't write good English. Now suddenly, over the last few months, everything's written like a professor. It's perfectly formatted, it's nice, it's clean, it's very understandable, because obviously she's adopted ChatGPT. Now my wife, who writes in English and has been writing it for years, she's gotten a little bit lazy. She started using ChatGPT to help her improve her English, as in find the mistakes that she's been making. Also, the people that she's communicating with in China for business reasons, because she works within import and export, they are now writing in Chinese into their own translation systems because ChatGPT is not available here, and it's automatically formatting it in English, and they're just trusting that it's good enough. They're willing to take the risk for business reasons that there's some misunderstanding there, as opposed to writing in English. They trust these systems now more than their own English level. So learning a language prior to this year for economic reasons wasn't that great of a choice. But now especially, and moving forward, it's not going to be that great of a choice. So why should we learn languages? Well, why do you want to learn a language in the first place? See, for me, learning a language it's about diving into a culture that's totally different to my own. You know how you go watch a sci-fi movie because you want to live in that universe for a while and experience it? That's what learning Chinese is to me. It's like going to a totally different world, experiencing something that's totally different to what I normally do. In fact, yesterday I was in the car and I was being chauffeured around by a Chinese doctor here, and we'll go on checking out some of the areas and stuff. Long story, became friends with a Chinese doctor, etc, etc. But anyway, I was having a conversation with this guy in the car, and we're talking for about 8 hours, and I was just discovering so many differences between my culture and his culture, like these two different places. And even Esperanto, you know, it has like such a rich and unique history, or even Latin. Like, I found it fascinating when I dived into a little bit of Latin to, you know, read the text where they were complaining about their slaves doing this and that. And it's just like, it's a totally different way of thinking, a different world. Not saying that we should be, you know, re-enslaving people or anything like that. You know, we can re-enslave people who don't willingly learn Esperanto, but just in general, we shouldn't be doing that. So, at the end of the day, if you're going to invest 6,000 plus hours, 2,000, 6,000, whatever amount of hours into a language, make sure you're doing it for a reason that's other than economic. And then maybe along the road, you'll get some type of work benefits from that language. But I'm pretty sure the majority of you will never find a work reason to use your languages. So if you do want to learn a language, make sure it's for non-economic reasons, and hopefully something amazing will happen along the way.